that because I thought what you thought until I spoke to someone about it. And because it's like, after a meeting, I said something about great that you used, and someone came, Nancy, it's like not very good, you know.
Well, like recycled concrete is usually more rounded than crusher run, so we have to take that into consideration when we develop our thickness. Oftentimes contractors want to recommend that because they can save money or they got something to save or something. And we're not against it as a product, it's just, you gotta look at it carefully in terms of the thickness.
And no one uses slag here, right? Slag?
If you're west of Pennsylvania, slag is the common building material.
Yeah.
Lots of slag.
I know what you're talking about.
Yeah.
It's a waste product from steel mills. Yeah.
Steel mills.
Yeah, we used to use,
Are we recorded?
fly ash from the power plants.
Full of mercury.
Yeah, we don't use it. We used to use, actually, we use that more for like when we put pipes in the ground for the trench backfill, not for roads, but we don't use it at all. It was a cheap product 30 years ago.
Lots of it.
Yeah. Yeah, thank you for this.
Yeah.
You don't need that. Pass it on the trolley, I don't know. Trolley needs true grid. What is it? True grid, that's the grid surface.
Oh, yeah. Spec something similar to this back here for this proposed lot on the church parking lot called GeoBlock. So what we run into on those kinds of products is that there's hardly any contractors that do it regularly around here, so your price gets high.
Right, for sure.
Unfortunately. So we did, is what happened over there, and we had to not do the project last year. So, I don't know.
I was in a contact with the sales rep on this, and I was looking at my driveway starting to crack a little bit, and he would sell it to me by the case, which is manageable, dropping a caseload of this stuff, and then I started thinking about the work involved and my age and this.
Like putting in a little bit at a time kind of thing, or?
Well, courtesy of Chesapeake Gas, when they ran their utility line, the edge of my driveway cracked. And from my doing power washing on this contractor spec house built in 1999, the driveway is slowly disappearing, So I said, maybe it'll last till I do, so we'll see. Anyway, so I put that aside, but I kept their contact. Phone.
I was told that they use a lot of it in Canada, in part because it's something that handles freezing and thawing well.
Oh, okay.
Because it's like a mesh that's,
Flexible.
that's down there, and the rest is either dirt and grass or I guess crushed whatever. Silence my phone. Good to see you, Tom.
Good to see everyone too.
Thank you for all that you sent us.
Yes.
Sure thing. Thanks for keeping us on track. With all this stuff, there's a lot of moving parts.
Yeah. But we're getting close.
Everybody's doing their part, but it's good to have someone really looking over the whole thing.
Now, shall we, I know Deborah's coming.
That was Glenn.
Yeah, Glenn said he was running late.
Yeah, Glenn's running late. Shall we start and incorporate them when they arrive? I think there's several things we can talk about that aren't kind of critical.
You've got a quorum.
So let me call this meeting to order of the Subdivision Code Subcommittee. I had several things that I thought we would cover today. I'd like to first touch upon where we stand with the minutes, and then basically go through, if you think of the note that Tom sent out highlighting where we've made changes, I thought we would review those in order, starting with the definitions, then going to 170.23, 170.24, 124, 170-30, and then come back to 170-19, which is the Planning Commission review, and really is kind of the process portion. And then end by looking at the cross-reference table, which I thank you for, Tom. I found it very, very helpful. So starting with the minutes, we identified at our last meeting that it's been a while since minutes have been reviewed and recorded. So I took it upon myself and I was at that point informed that I was the person responsible for this. So what I've done is I've gone back, the last time that I can find a set of approved minutes is for May 25th. So I've gone back and I've created minutes, I've listened to the videos, and have developed minutes for June 14th, July 15th, August 12th, August 20th, September 13th, October 15th, October 22nd, October 28th,
And so you're due for a Purple Heart.
and November 4th. Okay. So,
Motion to approve all of them.
no, we need to post them, and you need to have a chance to read and review them. For,
Next week. Joe will not be here.
okay.
I'll be away. Hey,
So if you notice any errors in them, please let us know, Joe, although you'll be away. Okay?
email them to me.
Yes.
Exactly, we will.
And they'll be attached to the agenda.
I have to say, I found it, watching all of these videos, and there were two that weren't available, so I had to kind of go back to my own notes from those dates to try to identify what we covered. It made me appreciate how much we've accomplished in a relatively short period of time, but also appreciate the advice that we've gotten from Tom, Charlie, and Janelle on this. And what I consider very thorough discussions, thoughtful discussions that we've had. So it's not a just rush to put something down. It's, I think, been a very considered process. So I thank you all for that. So next meeting, we'll hopefully review those minutes. I have my pencil. I will be recording minutes for this meeting. So we will now be up to date and be able to move forward with those.
Thanks for doing all that.
Yeah.
You are welcome. I had no idea how long it would take when I didn't realize that there were that many missing.
Yeah, I
so,
didn't think we were back that far.
Yeah.
But
so maybe you have some that I'm not aware of.
it's quite possible.
When did we start?
We started in May.
May, yeah.
Yeah.
So
So, because I want to make sure that Deborah's here for the discussion of the definitions and the real kind of code changes, I wonder if we could change the order in which I've just described as covering things, and instead first go to the cross-reference table of the 22 items.
What section?
And that's not a section, that's a separate document that it's on your right now.
And your pen's on top of
Yeah.
it.
Oh, okay.
Yeah. Tom, do you have a copy of this too?
I do.
Okay,
yes.
great. So the purpose of this was to be able to demonstrate to the public and basically to ourselves that the 22 items that have been in the code, that are in the current code, are covered off in the way, when we've redesigned the format and reformatted this, covering, grouping items together under categories, and with those categories, having a statement of intent, of standards, and of guidelines. And this was our check to make sure that we've really covered everything and that we haven't lost any of them. Or if we haven't transferred one over into that format, that there's a rationale and an explanation for it. So I'd like to first see if anyone has any comments on these. I have comments on a couple of them. I think this is a good thing for us to make available to the public at the meeting as a handout that could be available, because I think we will have several people hopefully attending who are very conversant with the current code and would wonder, where these items are. Welcome, Deborah.
So sorry.
No problem.
My message.
Pardon?
I said, hope you got my message.
Oh, I turned my phone off, but we knew you were coming, so.
Okay.
The only thing that we've covered is I've prepared minutes for, the last 12 meetings, and they'll be posted, and at the next meeting, we'll hopefully be able to adopt those and make any changes that might be required in them.
Great. Right here.
I think this table would also be useful to planning commission members who are used to working with the current code and the process they go through, and then to see these 22 that they've looked at over and over again, how they're treated in this code. I think it's good. It was a good idea for you to suggest we put together this table for them to really see how it's mapped out.
And I was thinking for maybe the public workshop, we could blow this up to very large, and we could post it on like a board, so people could take a look at it and come up and see where everything's been moved to, so we could discuss that, because I know this is a big change, and it's very important to everybody to understand that pretty much everything has transferred over into a different section, but it is still in the code.
And also to just stress the point to everyone on the planning commission that this now has some legs to stand on.
I think that's an important point, Deborah, because it's not just a high-level statement.
Right.
We've converted it into standards and guidelines.
Because frankly, we've all felt that frustration is that we prepare our vote, comments, recommendations based upon these points, and then are instructed that perhaps they're not weighted enough to hold up under the force of law. So I think it's important for us to get that message across to the LPC and to the public.
Now, does anyone have any comments or questions on the first page, which covers 1 through 7?
I do on number 2. I mean, the general public could pick up on integration of proposed major subdivision into existing terrain and surrounding landscape. I mean, if existing terrain is a cornfield, I mean, any new development will not be compatible with that, and they could argue that this should not be permitted because it will not fit into surrounding landscape. But
So I think the key thing then is to look at 170-26A and B
redefined per.
to see if our standards address that or would put us in the same position.
Yeah, I think that those help explain what we mean, because you don't see a standard about if it's a cornfield or if it's a vacant industrial lot, that it should be, that's not meant, what's meant by fitting into the terrain or landscape. It's things like grading and view sheds and other things that, I think that's the benefit of having not just a broad and intent statement, but some rationale or specifics to kind of help focus on what that means for someone who's looking at it.
That sort of goes with number 5, preservation of open space and scenic views. Well, if you're putting in a subdivision, again, in a cornfield, you're not preserving open space, or you're interrupting the quote scenic view of the corn, stuff like this. I mean, it's again, you can't make an omelet without breaking eggs, so.
I think that common sense also does tell us, as we do, to look at literally the surrounding neighborhood, the greater neighborhood, than what's adjacent to the cornfield, but what's beyond the cornfield.
Right. Okay.
And I don't know.
I just took a quick look at 17026A, and I'm going back to the integration, the number 2, the integration,
Okay.
not preservation of scenic views. And what I'm seeing there are things that much more have to do with, making sure it interconnects if there's a neighborhood next, nearby, flexibility and design to take the greatest advantage of the landscapes existing. Avoid separation resulting from high solid fencing. I mean, it's those kinds of things, I think. I don't know whether they're, I think it's I think it's an important point for us to read these through with that kind of view of, thinking of different situations that might present challenges.
Yeah, because talking about what's the one about screening objectionable features?
That's number 7. Number
yeah.
7.
I mean, you screen an objectionable feature, you may be blocking a scenic view. I don't know. It has to be case by case.
Well, if it's an objectionable feature, I assume it's not a scenic view. Perhaps it's the eye of the beholder in terms of the interpretation
The
of things.
objectionable view may be the existing neighborhood across the street, It doesn't go, it's either from or of the neighboring properties. I don't know. It could go either way. So,
I wonder if, I doubt we have time right now for us each to read through those with that set of glasses, Joe.
Yeah.
But I think it's important to do. So I wonder if for our next meeting, if you could.
I won't be here.
Oh, yeah.
You can provide comments.
Provide comments.
Yes.
Provide comments, yes.
I can do that.
Yeah, that would be good.
Okay. Okay.
Anything else on page 1?
I think before we move on from that about integration, I think you've all seen when you go to a public meeting and there's a subdivision or a land development, a lot of the public have concerns about this doesn't fit this area of the city. And that's just a general statement, and I think it's something that they may have different perspectives on what do they mean by that, but it's trying to, I think, allow someone who's reviewing it to say, what does integrating it in or matching to this area mean? It may be that if it were just next to it, it wouldn't match it, but then you have screening techniques and buffers and other things that, if that's the best place for that use, but it's not the same as the area, one of the areas right adjacent to it, how do you help integrate it into it? And there's a, it's a big statement, but there's a lot of different ways to do it if that's the intent. And Joe's comment on open space, I think open space can have a lot of meaning to a lot of different people. But as you know, now there's an open space definition and there's open space standards that's trying to help focus from a development review standpoint what's meant by open space so that you can make consistent decisions moving forward.
Yeah, I think the challenge always is in the more qualitative items, and, we should do as good of a job as we can to have operationalized the standards and making them clear.
Can't cover
But you
everything.
can't, yeah.
Yeah, and also to just add on, of course, every time I speak, of course, to add on, I think it's the timbre of my voice, is that as we're developing this, I was listening to Melanie discuss the annexation committee's work and the objectionable features that we need to screen. They're trying to address that a step back. So I think that the different projects that are going on, the different subcommittees that are going on right now are complementing the work of one another and hopefully coming together to just create a more cohesive and beautiful Lewis as we move forward into the future.
Here, here.
And on that note, I'll bid my adieu.
I would just add that,
Which button do I, okay. I'll just add that it's not really implicit in the code, but when, in our street section where we're talking about reverse curves, so you got one that goes like this, those reverse curves are typically used where you have an existing natural feature that you're working around. So it's not like explicitly written in there like that, but just keep that in mind.
And traffic calming.
Flexibility is there
And
to,
traffic calming too, right?
yeah,
Yeah.
yeah. Anything else on page 1? Can we go to page 2, items 8 through 14?
Isn't number 8 primarily upon the discretion of the BPW?
Yeah.
As is 9.
And when you go to the guideline, that's pretty much what it says. Yeah.
Yes.
Number 10.
Now,
Wow. Number 10, there's a lot of places, that we could go with this, stepping much further into the realm of chemical runoff and,
I sense that as a group, maybe everyone hasn't had a chance to digest the references. But we now have the roadmap, Tom, to do that. So I'd like to put this on the agenda for our next meeting also. So, we really have, to make sure that we've really done our job here in terms of looking at these.
I also get the sense that once this goes out to the public and also the planning commission, I think, when they see these cross-references and what the standards say, this will probably be an area that there are additional suggested refinements more so than other places, because this is what I think a lot of folks see as what is the plan review, not all the administrative of how things are dealt with and the meeting setups and things, but this is the real, I think, gist of, as Deborah said, how to incorporate something into Lewis so that it's meets everyone's expectations for quality of life and other things that they're after. But I think it's good for us to take a keen look at it. And again, I applaud doing this suggesting doing this cross-reference table, because it does help answer questions about where things are at as we made these changes.
Anything on page 3? I have some questions on 19. Let me remember what my question is here.
and the ROI on this one.
Well, that was mostly up to the annexation committee that the mayor puts together to examine that. It's more like financial number crunching than anything else.
Where we say assessment impact estimates before and after are identified as part of the engineer's report and can be addressed in a staff report for consideration during plan review. It wasn't clear to me the depth or degree or work that is in the engineer's report on this, because I, quite frankly, do not recall seeing a lot of this kind of information ever coming to the LPC.
So I would just say, and I know Charlie have a take on it too, since I wrote this, that was my initial thought. One of the application requirements for an applicant's engineer report is to say, what's the assessment value of the property before development? And I think that, and correct me if I'm wrong, they're supposed to at some point provide a projected assessment. And I don't know the rhyme or projected assessment once it's done, meaning the property value and the land value. So those are more of a land records evaluation, and I don't know how much it's used in Lewis to make a determination, but it is part of the process that they provide that. It's part of the applicant's engineer report, and the city engineer is obtaining that information. I'm not sure how it's used, but the reference to the staff report that's the new nomenclature for the engineer's report, since it's consolidated into every entire staff report that the planning commission would get.
Does the second sentence in this description, Tom, I read assessment impact estimates before and after, blah, blah, blah. Does that refer only to annexation reviews, or does that refer to everything? I wasn't clear whether.
It's for everything.
Yeah.
I'm not sure how well it's been used. I'm not sure how relevant it can be to it, and especially making a decision, or especially regarding a development. So I'm looking to Glenn for some advice. Is this one of those areas that could get us in trouble legally standing? Or is it just something we should ask for that maybe doesn't need to be a standard or an intent?
I mean, we've talked through some of these in the past, and I do think that they all have their place. They have some relevancy, and there are things to be considered. But again, this is one that, if we're relying upon this one to deny or approve a subdivision, probably not the firmest ground to be on. It's relevant in the context of what are we getting in this development, and how does it impact us, even fiscally. But I don't think. This is one of those ones that are just kind of squishy.
Is it not come up at the annexation decision than at the planning level?
It's definitely brought up as if a property is annexing into the city, they look at
Very much so. That's
as part of that. Is that something that you want to continue to look at as part of a subdivision? If we anticipate most of the subdivisions would be annexation, knowing that it's already been looked at, is it something that we need to look at for a site plan? I'm just asking questions, trying to,
When I look at this, my concern is twofold, because there are two parts to this equation. One is what's the estimated expense to the city, and the other is what's the estimated tax that's going to come in. And I suspect, though I'm not sure, that it's easier to figure out, to make a fairly accurate estimate of what value you're adding to a property and how the assessment might go up, and therefore it's a simple multiplication to figure out what the taxes would be. I'm not aware of the city having a set of formulas or techniques or approaches for getting an accurate estimate of the expense, especially outside of annexation, especially for just a subdivision within the city.
I'm trying to think of any cost, because all the costs that are incurred by the city are placed on the responsibility of the developer to pay. So like all my bills go to the developer from the beginning of the project all the way through when it's constructed. They all go to the developer for repayment. And any administrative costs should be the same way. I know the Board of Public Works does that. They add 15% to my estimate for their administrative costs.
Our city doesn't cover schools, so, if you think of, I can imagine, cities elsewhere where there might be large tracts of undeveloped land, where adding, 2,000 houses is going to place a burden on police and fire and, basic services, and often schools, but,
Good point, yeah.
Schools aren't in here, so.
So is this something, based on what I'm hearing, is something that maybe we want to remove from even the requirement for a submission for an application? Or do we want to downgrade it somehow? Because it's not one of the criteria now, it's just kind of just general information. How do you feel about addressing it? Keep it, dump it, somewhere in the middle?
I think Nancy makes a good point, that when you talk about and I hadn't thought about this, long-term operation and maintenance costs, those are costs that the city's gonna incur for maintaining the roads and everything, and there probably is some value to the assessment.
in terms of, at least you know that there's additional tax revenue. I don't know how that all works either, but
I feel like, just as an example, since it's already in the books, right, Pearl, right? Is the Lewis Waterfront Preserve, this issue came up a lot, but that was more at the annexation level, correct?
Yes.
So, was it going to be worth it to the city in the long run?
I think it makes sense for annexation.
Yeah, but I don't know that it makes sense here. I tend to agree with you. I'm never big on pulling things out.
Yeah, neither am I, so.
That is the important distinction, though, I think, is that when you're considering whether to bring something into the city or not, then you can take into account fiscal issues and whether it's good or bad for the city. Because remember, in an annexation, the city council appoints a three-member panel that's supposed to determine whether it's in the best interest to annex or not. And so they look, obviously, at what's it going to cost if we have this property in. But then once the property is in, your zoning laws tell people what they can and cannot do with their property. So if the zoning laws say you can have density at this number and lot sizes at that number, even if it's going to cost the city $1 gazillion, I think that you're obligated to approve it unless there's some other reason that, other reasons that are land use type reasons that would give you reason to deny it. So I tend to agree that this makes all kinds of sense in the context of an annexation, but in the context of subdivision, other than just having that general knowledge of, sort of how we're going to plan in the years out because of wear and tear on streets and those sorts of things, I don't think, though, that it's relevant in the context of shall we or shall we not approve this subdivision.
Unless it comes up in the conditions that, asking, I think we're seeing some novel suggestions like a council, and, in conditions, could this possibly come up that we say yes or no based on the basis of estimated tax returns, but, putting future wear and tear back onto the HOA, if it's large enough to have an HOA.
Yeah, I guess the issue there is that you have a tax structure that's set up, a property tax and other things that are supposed to take care of that. So if you shouldn't extract from one development, a greater fee because they're coming in. I mean, that's the property tax should go up if we're not collecting enough taxes to cover all those sorts of things.
Question for Glenn. I don't think it's really come up about the prices for a proposed subdivision, the prices that the units will be sold for, except in Dutchman's Harvest. There was a lot of number crunching for the units there. But is it suitable to ask on a subdivision what the developer is expecting to collect on lots, or what the finished houses will be, or saying a unit of a condo or something, what the prices will be? Is that up to us to ask, or is that?
Well, again, it's another one of those areas that I would never want you basing an approval on whether a developer is getting rich or only just making this thin margin based upon, that's a business economic decision that the developer is supposed to engage in.
Correct.
We are supposed to, through our historic preservation, or through HPARC and through other things, the product that's going to ultimately be built there, that should be baked into our code and baked into our committees, but it shouldn't be economic gain or maybe failure. Maybe a developer comes in and says, you're going to fail with that type of product, but that shouldn't drive the planning commission's decision to, approval.
On the other hand, it may help assure the neighbors that the effect on property values is going to be going up. If the unit's being sold for $500,000, $1 million each, and the neighbors are sitting in a $200,000 house,
Where might that be, Joe? I'll buy one if
They've been there for 20 years, yeah, I know. But
But I think that is something that the developer should be, if that's truly something that the developer believes is going to occur, because that's something that I'd be singing from the podium as developers council. Again, I think that piece of the picture to minimize or calm any concerns the neighbors have, that's really the developer's job to paint that picture. because, again, we have building codes and zoning codes, and if they're going to build a product that fits within the confines of our code, it shouldn't matter to us whether it's going to be a $1.5 million property or a $200,000 property.
Right, let him bring it up.
And number 13 does actually address property values.
Yes.
So we did, and through site design, that gets
I'd
addressed.
also like to continue on Joe's point for a second, which is, not only does this involve 13, but we've been, backed off when we bring up, site design or what the end products are going to cost in the past. And of course, it goes into our, which number is it? Number 22, with the diverse housing options, when we don't know any of these things, cost of the units, or what things are really going to look like, how can we say whether it meets these criteria?
So you actually have the ability to look at and ask for architectural information.
That's right.
So then you'll have a general idea about what the buildings will look like. I think in some of the site design, it's, not every house should look like a cookie cutter, to get some creativity and flexibility and different aesthetics into the development. So they might show you 1 or 2 products, and there may be like 4 or 5 different houses, like a single family, and a ranch and a 2-story, and just different ones. You can ask for that information absolutely as part of the subdivision process.
I'm thinking it's,
But you're asking for the
numbers.
talking about diversity, not just in architectural design, but in terms of price.
I think it could cut both ways though, because it's so market-driven, and from the time that council gives final approval to the time that they actually have a sample house up and for sale can be almost a year. And, I mean, right now, I'm working with a couple developers right now on some projects outside of Lewis, and they wish they had their houses up 4 months ago, but by the time they do have their houses up next spring, who knows what the market's going to do. It's probably not going to be quite as high as it was over the last 3 or 4 months. So I think you can cut both ways. Like, you could give some comfort to the neighbors, but if you say something that's too high and then comes back lower later because of the market, it might drive it the other way.
I'm not sure I heard an answer to the question of, can the LPC ask what they, at that point in time, knowing that things could change, et cetera, can they ask, what will you be selling these units for?
I would advise, again, if I was asked, I would advise against it. I think you can ask, as Janelle said, we'd like to see product types. What is the look and feel of what you're hoping to build there? But again, I think saying to a developer, how much will these units cost? And so the question I would pose to you is, how does that drive a decision as to an approval or a denial? Again, if you can write into your zoning code that we're only going to have houses no smaller than this size, and we're going to have open space of this amount, and we're going to have products that look like this and heights that look like that. So, the zoning code is where you're supposed to do all of that work to drive the product that you ultimately want to have. So if a developer is, the planning commission's job is to lot sizes and make sure there's enough natural area and make all of those sorts of things. But once the lots are created, what goes on that lot is driven by the building code and the zoning code. So, think about it that way too. You could ask a developer, what are you planning on, what's the price point going to be, and all those sorts of things. Then city council goes and changes the zoning code, and that developer no longer can build what he promised the planning commission he was going to build. And you gave him approval based upon the product you thought you were going to get. Now the city council has changed the code, so there's no way you can get that product. So that's why I say basing a decision on the price point, I could never advise you to go. I think that's why probably you get some pushback when those questions are asked by members of a planning commission, because ultimately it shouldn't be that shouldn't be someplace we're hanging our hat on a decision.
But we also get pushback when it's, what is this going to look like, you know? And that's, the attorneys will generally advise us that, not our attorney, but that's not what's being decided here today,
Yeah,
Like, it's improper for us to ask such a question.
Right. Yeah, I hear you on that, but I think that those attorneys are correct in that the zoning code and building code are going to drive it. But I also think that it's in a developer's best interest to have some renderings if they know kind of what direction they're going, because that is ultimately what gets people comfortable with approving or denying a project.
Again, this would only be in case of a townhouse or a condo project. If you have a subdivision with individual houses, it's only up to the homeowner.
Right.
The people who buy the lots.
Yeah.
So they will pick and choose.
Yeah, but
So it's condos or townhouses.
But the one thing, I mean, I think in some of the changes that are being proposed here, we're actually addressing some of what I believe the frustrations have been in terms of what will it look like, so that things like the garage needs to be set back X feet. I mean, so you don't know, and there are conditions on, in some cases, on building materials, but so you don't know exactly, is it going to have shingles or brick or something, but we are, I think, identifying things that seem to have been important to people in the past in terms of architectural design and fitting into the community and those kinds of things, that we have to make them concrete and kind of operationalize them.
Yeah, that's a good way to put it, is they have to be concrete. And I mean, if it's in the code, generally things like that, so long as you include them in the code, they can be, but they can't be these kind of subjective, the planning commission is going to tell you what color you can, so, I mean, as long as the developer knows going into it what the rules are, it's okay if the rules are, we want the garages here, we want it, but changing the rules halfway through a development project, or the planning commission coming up with a condition that, severely limits what they'd otherwise be able to build under the existing code, those are the sorts of things that, would keep me up at night.
Yeah. I mean, I don't want to belabor this point, but I think the question about price comes into play because the comprehensive plan specifically states that there's a need in Lewis to provide housing at a more affordable price for the people who work here. And it's hard to figure out how you can judge the diversity of housing types in a development. And I think this comes into play, as you say, Joe, more with townhouses and condos than, where you're selling lots.
Right.
Throughout the county, I think that's true, and that becomes a catchphrase that, the developer will put forward, that they're providing, low-income housing or workforce housing.
And certainly, there are other jurisdictions where there are requirements that there be, in a sense, in those kinds of developments, a diversity of options. So, you have places, I mean, it's kind of famous in New York City now, where you unfortunately have like a separate door on many high-rise buildings because a certain percentage of the units were set aside to sell at a lower price, and perhaps not have all of the amenities that may be provided in the rest of the building, but providing people with the location and the value of a place in terms of. Yeah, I don't know where
Back around.
help us get that question.
How do we feel about the assessment impacts before and after being part of the
Plan review process, because it sounded like everybody kind of recognizes its greatest impact is from what I've heard, is in the annexation process. So is that something we still need? Well, understanding that the property value information is still part of the code as it relates to site design and site suitability. So I think that was our initial question that was asked, and how do you guys feel about it?
My suggestion and, you know, this is just a suggestion, is that it's appropriate to say that this criteria it primarily applies to annexation. And so while we are asking for assessment impact estimates, that this really isn't a criteria that's being used to approve or deny a subdivision within the city.
I think
And
that's,
I wonder, there are a couple of these where, as I've read them, my sense was these weren't criteria that are actually being applied right now, or that we have a way of applying right now. And so, you know, I feel reluctant to remove a criteria, but where you have a criteria that actually isn't being used, we have no way of applying it.
I think you'd have to go back probably 5 years to read the city council's report on, say, Lewis Waterfront Preserve, and see what the council people came up with at that time. And I think it obviously was a good report because the process was approved, but that's one way of seeing what, you know, do some homework way back then, and see what they came up with, and see what their language was.
I also think this is an opportunity, since we're taking a very deep dive into the subdivision code, is it still appropriate? You know, does it make sense? You know, is there something missing? You know, is there something that, you know, we don't like taking things out of code, but are they no longer, like, if you look at, I think there's some very interesting uses for business licenses that I was like, I'm not sure that exists anymore. I'm like, a horse-drawn carriage. I'm like, I'm not sure that business exists anymore. But are there things that are missing that we need to make sure? Because I think we've added a lot to the code. So, you know, it's just finding, you know, what makes sense for today and going forward.
And see, I would argue that 21, job creation, is something that hasn't been used, that we don't really have a way of applying it.
Yes, and I think Glenn said at our last meeting or the one before, probably not a good one and I think that's why, as we discussed and Tom wrote it, is this one didn't actually make its way into any of the standards because it's really
Obtuse.
yeah, it's obvious.
yes,
Yeah.
so
I'd like to add on 19, last comment, is that perhaps we could, Janelle, you're part of both committees, so you might know the best. But is that point being addressed at all within the annexation subcommittee?
no, because they're only looking at the codes. They're not looking at the annexation process because unfortunately that falls completely under council. But they're looking at the codes, and really the cluster subdivision is what they're focusing on.
Okay. So I guess I think it's really kind of a parking lot issue, but I do believe it may be in the wrong place.
Yeah.
The one thing I'd say is that the provisions like this, I'm not sure how old this is, but it was fairly common years and years ago as part of a review to look at impacts. And then over time, it evolved into, if you're going to be looking at impacts, you need to do studies for what is the specific impacts and how can they be assessed. So I do know that in communities it comes up with, how is this development going to impact the existing park system, and can they get to the park system, and shouldn't there be either additional park or fees provided? And that's all, I think, fairly well spelled out, but you do need to do a lot more research and background information and justification to apply impact fees today than you would have, which I think this is probably was suggested of. There's impacts to the city, and the developer should be looking to contribute. But I think if we're going down that road, then Lewis, this is probably a parking lot thing that for certain impacts, it should be looked at, but what's the background information to make that happen?
I agree, Tom. so where does this leave us? I think on job creation, we're saying we're taking that out.
So it sounds
We're
like,
just acknowledging that we, and on this one, we're saying,
I think it, from what you have all said is, it makes more sense in the annexation, and then we can add to the right-hand column that it primarily applies to annexation, and it's not criteria to be used to approve or deny as part of a development. I put development because these criteria also impact site plan developments. So we're looking at that. So I just put that, and I think maybe, and I think that, does that work for you, Tom? For giving that
that makes
information?
sense.
So we'll just take rid of the
Before we
second
move on from
sentence
this
and
page,
replace
and
it.
if we're done with that one, there was one question that I had, and I emailed Charlie about it earlier. Number 15. It says, effect on area roadways and public transportation. My question is, I can't point to anything in the code that says a standard for public transportation. It's not that we don't do it, like if, typically my experience in Lewis was that if it's on a state road and BART or someone's providing transportation, we discuss the, either a bus stop or providing area for pullover. So those types of things I think are discussed, but there's, to my knowledge, unless Charlie knows about something, working in streets or some of the other standards, we don't have a standard like 17027 that we can point someone to and say, here's the standard or the intent for public transportation. So the question is, do we leave it in there? Or do we apply a standard or a guideline, maybe a guideline, because it would only apply in certain situations, that if it fronts on a public transit route, that there needs to be consideration for how, where a bus stop could be located.
I actually have a note on 15 too. I've heard Councilman Williams bring up a few times recently the notion that perhaps new developments should have should be required to have shuttle buses. And could this be a place to note that?
Well, I'm actually thinking, what about replacing public transportation with alternative transportation opportunities? Because that would get your bus, your bike, your shuttles, your multimodal paths, especially for our state-maintained streets. Those are all going to fall under DELDA, and then that leaves the city some opportunity on city streets is, do we want to put in a bike lane? Do we want to put in a multimodal path if we don't have the sidewalks? And I think that might be a better term. And it covers a lot more than just one form of alternative transportation.
Yeah,
And I'm just throwing that out there, so thoughts and...
I personally like it because I think that as a state, we're not a great public transportation state, and especially southern Delaware. So Glenn's looking perplexed over here, just you're thinking.
I'm listening.
Does alternative
Public works, that's the one word.
transportation include public transportation?
Well, yeah, because typically the main transportation is vehicular.
Okay.
So
I
a
guess
bus would be included in, and we can clearly call it out as like alternative transportation such as bus, bicycle, pedestrian, et cetera.
Because I like the idea, but my only question was, is it that we're saying the effect on area roadways, public transportation, and alternative transportation, or whether it's just, like, if you...
I would just combine it, but I'm not sure how,
Yeah.
It's also parking.
on-street parking, but I'm not sure how a development would affect that. I'm just coming back, I'm like, there might be a need for that, and typically, again, the city does require sidewalks in all developments.
It would fall under street interconnectivity.
Street interconnectivity, maybe it's something where a guideline is like not in a subdivision road, but maybe the connection that put in a bike path onto.
I do think, that it definitely has an effect, though, because we're we're trying interconnectivity, but realistically, as we go up Savannah Kings New Road, there's one access, and it's, involves a wrong-way turn onto a busy roadway, and then developments outside of town are attracting hundreds of people who will be enjoying the beach and the downtown amenities and parking their cars.
I had
think
two,
that's-
I guess, clarification questions. One is, I'm confused about looking for an alternative term because in my mind, at least what I understood is these 22 phrases are going away. We're just
yeah.
looking for, once they've been removed from the code, where are they covered at? So I didn't really see the purpose of creating or choosing another term to replace it, since we're just trying to say,
I guess what I
where's the
would,
code dealing with these topics elsewhere?
Yeah.
So that was my first clarification. The other one is, I think we already deal with alternative transportation in the form of multimodal, where we talk about developments should be designed for complete streets and other things, which is in the guidelines for streets, which would include all forms of
bicycles, yeah.
transportation. So maybe, now I'm just thinking out loud with the subcommittee, the specific reference in that item, number 15, to public transportation, it may already be included in a broader context of multimodal or alternative transportation already in there. So maybe we're covered. And then just so I know moving forward, are we taking these 22 references out of the code and just providing them in the spreadsheet for reference later on?
I'll give my answer to the last one first, which is, I thought that we were taking them out, and currently in the draft, they're out. I think initially, I thought as like a safety valve, leave them in, but I think it is cleaner and more accurate, in a sense, to just take them out.
Okay.
And so, back to your first point, it's not 15 that we would be editing, it's the content in 170-27 that we would need to look at and make sure that A, we're able to ask for a traffic impact study, and B, that in guidelines, there would be something that would give the LPC the ability to set as a condition things around a bike path, providing space for a bus stop,
I'd like to continue on with that thought. On the category being people moving, and that's a buzzword these days, but would streets be the proper place to add it? I do think that if we have the opportunity, adding something here about people moving might be very wise, but is streets the right place to do it?
Well, that's why it was added in as a guideline about complete streets, which that's a term that's used by transportation departments to talk about land use and roads simultaneously, so that you're dealing with people moving as part of that context of not just providing streets for cars. Streets are to be for all forms of transportation and for community gathering and other things. It's really, I think, a term that's used, and I think it's also referenced in the site design because it is a land use concept too.
Where could we encourage that, though? The idea particular of those shuttle buses, or of some alternative way to ensure that people do have ways to get into town other than walking and bike trails, because many people here are active retirees, but we do have a very aging population, and I think the people moving is really a big deal. And why not be innovative if we have the opportunity to do so?
And I think that's where your guidelines come in, and don't forget your guidelines, they don't limit you into ideas. there are opportunities for ideas, but if you have an idea that you can enforce via the law, you can add that idea. That's definitely a condition you can add onto something. It doesn't, the standards are saying, hey, this is what you have to do. But you could ask for relief from that, because sometimes there's a need. The conditions are, hey, we believe these potentially could, be conditions, depending on what type of the development, where it is, make sense to be conditions. And then, of course, you have an opportunity to come up with other conditions that are not in code, because you just never know, that make sense for a development.
Can we ask Tom and Janelle and Charlie, your role in this too, based on this discussion, to look at 170-27 and the guidelines and identify, are there additional guidelines that would be helpful in addressing this issue of people moving and providing walkways, pathways, bicycle paths, jitney courses,
Yeah, because
whatever.
A little bit on that one, because I remember our discussion from the
Downtown Parking Committee is that it's one thing to set up a jitney or a shuttle from a development, but it has to have a landing spot too. And that's more of a citywide discussion, I think. Anyway, just throwing that out there.
Yeah, as I'm looking, and just the street section is really excellent. I know that was a lot of in the detail, but when you go to page 71 and you look at the guidelines, it's really quite short. We don't have much in the way of guidelines. So that does seem like an appropriate place to add alternative people moving.
I think the intent is far more detailed than, this item that was one of the 22. It's got a lot of description. It might not cover everything you're talking about, Deborah, but it's got a lot of description in there about, interconnectivity.
Oh, absolutely.
It's pedestrian traffic and vehicular movements, and it doesn't speak directly to some of the things we're talking about, but I think that intent is probably stronger than what you have right now.
But I think the intent is definitely stronger than what we have right now. I guess the question is, are there items in the intent and in the content of what we've been discussing right now that should be included in guidelines? Because if we're thinking of the guidelines as the areas that you would look at in terms of setting conditions, let's make sure we put them in.
And I'm not going to spend long on this one, but there's another wild idea I'd like to throw out, which as we change and evolve as a society with motor vehicles, larger subdivisions and developments are going to need to think about having areas for electric vehicle charging hubs. And I think leaving that space in a new development would be really something forward-thinking to put in here.
Under streets, you think?
I think under streets. What do you think? Or would it be better off, would it be open space or recreational space, or would it be streets?
But is it...
I'm just trying to think, because typically if it's my vehicle and I'm going to have an electric vehicle, I'm going to charge it at my house.
In your garage or your driveway, you plug it in at home.
If you have a garage or driveway, but if we're talking about condos and townhomes, they don't. And in the city of Lewis here, I think, we have a few I know because my husband donated them.
Yeah.
But I know that's something that's spreading and that we're doing in throughout Delmarva, and actually Lewis is no longer a leader on that. And I think it would be something really interesting to explore.
Yeah, we can definitely look at it as a potential guideline. Absolutely.
Yeah, I think it's a good thought for a guideline, because you may have people who, their primary home is 80 miles away, they're visiting. And that's about the range of an electric vehicle, if I understood it, so it's good to have those. And I think areas like Lewis are thinking about that. The other, I think, evolving thing is like on downtown on 2nd Street, with Uber and other shared driving, you need a space that people can pull over and let someone out of the traffic lane. So as we're evolving with new technologies, it's important to consider those types of improvements in it so that, we can take advantage of them.
Also, if we're talking about streets, if we're talking about areas, especially with a townhome development or with an apartment complex, loading zones, because how many people are getting their groceries through Instacart, everything in their home decor, delivered via Amazon or some other, it's constant. If you're talking about streets that aren't real wide, a FedEx or a UPS truck can really be problematic. Sorry to open a can of worms at this last moment, but once you start thinking on it,
We want to,
The streets are wide enough for fire engines or
Yeah.
garbage trucks.
So-
Right.
That shouldn't be an issue. And for loading zones, a lot of the fire marshals have no parking in front of certain condos, all that stuff. They have yellow curbs. And I'm sure it will not stop any delivery driver from just pulling there, calling upstairs, having the delivery come down to pick up an item. So, yeah, it's sort of covered by now. Yeah.
The big item about the Uber and Lyft and those, it's really kind of in the downtown areas is where there's been a lot of scenarios, and it's like that's where they kind of need, the drop off and pick up is the seminars I've been attending is how do we address the fact that we'll be using shared vehicles and electric vehicles and a lot more Uber and Lyfts, and which is actually kind of, I don't know how it's been doing through the pandemic, but it's like how do we plan for those? So I think that's definitely something we can look into.
I'm going to try to move us along. These are important points, so I want to summarize where I think we are. We have said that we will come back and revisit this at our next meeting, and that gives people a chance, and Joe will send in comments.
I'll be away next
It
week.
gives us a chance for us to look at some of these qualitative things and say, have we done the job we should be doing in terms of making these concrete where they're important, okay? And then secondly, we have two that we think no longer apply or apply in different areas. So 19 is more applicable for, is important for annexation that wouldn't be a consideration in subdivisions. And 21, we have no way of actually operationalizing it and applying it, and it has not in the past been applied, so. And then the third thing is we're asking Tom, with input from Janelle and Charlie, to work with the discussion we've just had and look closely at streets and the intent statement and the discussion we've had, and come up with some ideas of how we could codify this. I mean, I guess it's not codifying it really if it's just a guideline, but put it in our guidelines so that the LPC has a way when we're looking at subdivisions to take these factors into consideration. Okay.
Tom, I never did read through the Bellbot reference that you've got in the guidelines right now for streets. I did just pull it up, and it's got a lot of things in there, like similar to what we're talking about. So it might have some of those things covered, but sure, I wrote down everything we talked about.
I think also to add to that is when you're getting into the traffic studies, the length of time,
Sometimes you said, I'll keep talking.
the length of time when you're getting into the traffic studies, that passes from the initial application and traffic study to when it maybe even gets in front of us for a final decision can sometimes be lengthy. I know we're trying to shorten that, but the reality is, with the rate of growth here, traffic changes. And particularly the winter traffic has increased. And at what point, adding some cases, something in here, so that if 2 years have passed, I think it's reasonable to ask the developer to update the traffic study. And we've seen that issue come up, but we haven't really been able to ask it. Is that correct?
Well, they've come and gone in 2 years' time. That LLC's been dissolved, and it's all on the homeowners association, usually over a certain period of time anyway. But I like your idea. Because things do change.
Is there any?
Yeah.
Is there any, I mean, we're trying to speed up the process so that doesn't happen. But is there any reason why one can't say that when it goes to city council or something, that the traffic, they need to be providing a traffic study that's been conducted within the last year?
As a guide, would that be a guideline, so that...
I think that's a Charlie thing. I don't know how, what's the standard for updating traffic
Yeah.
analyses and,
Requiring one has a standard, because usually it's based on like the size of the development, whether it really
The number of trips.
requires one.
I mean, I think, I'd have to think about it a little bit. There are places in the process, like say, the warranty inspection usually happens like a whole year after the project's been accepted by city council. Maybe as part of that, you could require some updated traffic study if it required one from the beginning.
I guess to me, it's more, I mean, I think what you're thinking of is a project where, although we're trying to work fast, we get a traffic impact study early in the process. Now we're, 24 months later, 2 years have gone by, other developments have come online, and is that still valid data to rely upon for this approval?
Yeah.
And so, I mean, I don't know how, I think there would come a point where you could require updated traffic impact numbers. I just don't know from an engineering perspective if there's like a standard guideline that a traffic impact study becomes stale after 24 months or some period of time.
And it's really a Delta question. No, I'm sorry, because the determination typically of a traffic impact study is going to come from DelDOT. And I know they've done this in the past. It's like if like 2 developments ago did the study, well, they don't have to redo the numbers because they'll take what numbers and add those developments into this. But if they don't have a summer number, like they'll wait and go get the summer numbers so they can have that updated information. But typically the requirements for what constitutes the data in a TIS typically comes from DelDOT. Because Charlie, have we ever required a TIS on a city street? So typically they're coming from DelDOT. I think it's something we can ask, and we definitely can have conversations with DelDOT about, and make sure we're on the same information with them, because they have multiple different ways of looking at it. But I think we can definitely ask them if the city wants more information. Or newer information, because
I don't even think we have anything in our code right now about traffic impact studies.
I think maybe we need to then, because when can anyone here recall DelDOT recommending that a development, putting the kibosh on a development based upon traffic? And it's the number one, it's probably one of the number one complaints in greater Lewis area, some of which will be part of the city of Lewis in our lifetimes.
So the existing code says the planning commission by majority vote may require a traffic impact study conducted by an outside agency at the expense of the applicant, should conditions warrant such a study.
What section is that?
That's number 15 of the 22.
Oh, of the 22.
Of the 22.
Yeah, okay.
So have we, it sounds like, what I'm hearing is that isn't actually included in 170-27.
No, I don't think it is.
I don't think it is.
Yeah.
So, I mean, we say it requires consideration of impacts. That, to me, that is very much a softening of the prior requirement.
Yeah,
So-
we could definitely add that back in there, at least with that language, if not a little bit more
Yeah.
specific.
And that's what's currently in the code, so I assume, Glenn, that's okay.
Yeah, well, you can't assume everything that's in the code is okay,
Yeah.
but I do think that properly applied, that a planning commission could require a traffic impact study, yes.
Okay.
And should that be more than a guideline?
Well, this isn't a guideline, this
That's what I'm saying,
Right.
it should be a condition here, correct?
Well, it wouldn't be a condition for every development, but the planning commission could set that as a requirement.
Yeah,
You know, not as, yeah,
because a 5-lot major subdivision may not require
A traffic study, yeah.
Typically is not going to require a traffic impact study. Typically, when you get into the developments that require, from a DELDOT perspective, that require a traffic impact study, they're well over 200 homes. Because at that point, you're looking at massive impacts to the road system. I think what we can also do is add a TOA, a traffic operational analysis, which is typically a step down from a traffic impact study, but they're still taking data and looking at that intersection and how that development's going to impact that intersection, to see if there are any upgrades that need to happen at that intersection. So I think instead of having to do a full-blown TIS, go miles out looking at something, you're just looking at this intersection, maybe a couple, especially if it's a smaller subdivision, and we want information. So I think that provides some alternatives and some options.
that's helpful. So then we can add to 170-27, Charlie, something that basically says the planning commission by majority vote may require a traffic impact study or a traffic operational analysis.
In the standards or the guidelines?
I think it's a standard.
Okay.
It's not a code requirement that they have to do it for every time.
It's the planning commission.
It's going to require a vote from the planning commission
Right, optional.
and/or mayor and council.
Yeah,
Gotcha.
yeah. Okay. Okay, so we'll come back to these again next week, and we'll have more input on it, and we'll have some revisions from Charlie and from Tom on these. I mean, the revisions actually are to the draft code.
Yes.
But they then relate to these.
Got it, yep.
Okay. Okay, shall we move on to 170-6, definitions? And I hope everyone's had a chance to look through these. I'm going to go through page by page. So 170-6, let's go from access way to approval, council. Any comments? Yep, this version.
Just to mention that the ones that are underlined means they've been added or revised, the ones that aren't are already in there. Not that we can't change ones that are already in there.
Yeah. Okay, should we go through approval provisional? Sorry, page 3.
Yeah, I only have one.
Everyone's looking on this version, are they? I just want to make sure I get the right page numbers, because I have...
I only have one, Tom. I think I provided you with a definition for casing pipe, for underneath it. Yeah, so I can send that to you again, but I'd like to get that in there because we didn't have it in the old code, but I have it in the new code for sewer and water.
What does it read, Charlie? Define a casing pipe?
It's used in underground construction to protect utility lines of various types from being damaged. Such damage might occur due to the elements of nature or human action.
Sort of like a conduit.
Yeah, so like oftentimes we want to put a casing underneath a road or a waterway so that we can access that utility from outside the boundaries of the road or the waterway.
Protection, okay, that's good.
Anything on page 4?
Actually,
I saw a finger.
Combining of lots, can we also call parcel consolidation? And that are combined by, they can be combined by deed, but it would be nice if we had a record plan showing that they're being combined.
Combining a lot / parcels.
Well, lots, it's a lot of record, so I'm okay with that. They are combined by deed, but having a record plan and then also calling it a parcel consolidation plan, because it's used both ways.
Are you saying that should be added to within the definition? Or are you saying parcel consolidation plan should be a term defined?
Both.
Okay.
Well, combining of lots, right, it requires still requires planning commission review, right? Because I thought
No.
it does not? I thought in Lewis we
No,
combine
we
lots.
just fixed, didn't we, is that the one, because it's or is it a lot line
Lot line
adjustment? It's a lot line adjustment.
adjustment.
So the parcel consolidation still requires review by the planning commission and mayor and council, but that's not in this definition, and it just says you can do it by deed.
That's what's giving me some pause, because I don't want
I don't want it saying that you can
it seems
just-
misleading that you just do it by deed.
Deed, and then nobody sees it.
Right.
So I'm like, yeah, if, one, it's combining of lots, comma, parcel consolidation, because it's gonna, you can call it both ways, but it's 2 or more lots of record which are combined into one lot of record, or however we turn that, but it has to go through the city's process.
We're in the code where, what's it called in the actual code? Is it called, because I want to be sure that the term is the same here as we call it later on when we say you have to go through the process.
It's a combining of lots.
Okay.
It's just, I have always professionally known it as a parcel consolidation, not a, so,
But the definition itself needs to be revised, so it's not just by deed.
via deed, because it's part of Article 2 minor subdivision, combining of lots.
Yeah. Sorry, Tom, are you doing the edits on these? Who owns this?
I'll be doing it. I may need to ask Janelle a question,
Yeah.
but my understanding, based on what she said, is we'll just change the definition, say, call it combining of lots / parcel consolidation, and then go on into the definition and say by deed or parcel consolidation plan.
Don't you want to say under combining of lots?
Definition.
Something like the combining of 2 lots through a minor subdivision? I mean, I just want to be clear that
It's through a review process that requires a review by the planning commission, approval by mayor and council. So we need to get that, because they're gonna need a deed, but they just can't go straight to the deed. They actually have to come through a planning process as identified in 170-14.
there's 170-14, is that
Well,
minor
that's the
subdivision?
application, yeah, because, or if we just reference 170 Article 2, it's minor subdivisions and combining of lots.
Yeah, that'd be fine too. Mhm.
So Janelle will work with Tom, and we'll have a revision to this for the next meeting.
Sounds good.
Okay. Anything else on page 3? Page 4.
I have one on page 4. On page 4, I know it's been discussed already, but on height. As I see this, it says that the line of the street on which the building will face to the highest point of the highest roof. Would it be appropriate to say architectural feature, rather than say roof, as there has been a discussion about things that extend beyond the roof height, which is a lively discussion at present?
Well, that one has actually went away as of Monday night.
Right, okay.
So,
Yes, okay,
yep.
yes.
And I think, I'm guessing this definition matches the one in the zoning code, Tom?
Yeah,
Yeah.
it's from the zoning.
I'm just saying that people, that there could be people looking for a loophole, and that perhaps architectural feature or physical feature roof, comma, physical feature, or, what's other terminology that would cover everything?
But is the problem that we can't change the code by changing just a definition if the zoning has said they're not going to consider those?
Well, because so the roof is the roof. If you have,
An elevator shaft.
that is not the roof. The roof is the roof of the house. We have exceptions that can go beyond the roof, but the roof of the house is still the ridge line of the house. So it's how we define the word roof. And I think if we're just matching the subdivision with the zoning code, it just stays the one, because I think that could open a bunch of worms I don't think you want to get into at this point, because of what happened with the previous ordinance that went away on Monday
You
night.
definitely underestimate me, Janelle.
I was going to say, what I'm hearing.
I'm not so sure the council's going to want to get back into that one.
You know, I understand your point. I guess I'm not sure that in the subdivision is the place where we would change this without addressing it generally or in zoning.
Point taken.
Because that would be the key thing. So,
I was just searching the subdivision code to see if height ever comes up as an issue, because when would height actually have any relevance to subdivision?
It really doesn't.
Yeah, especially when we don't know what the buildings even look like.
I mean, they tell us what the maximum height is for code, and they typically tell us what the maximum height is going to be. But again, it's just a note in the data column verifying that it complies with the code.
All right, withdrawn.
5, 6,
You're quick.
sorry,
No, that's okay.
take your time. I thought the illustration here was very helpful in terms of being clear about, because I think people have a lot of problems with corner lots, et cetera, and having both a kind of traditional right-angle corner lot and a, odd, pointy kind of corner lot is helpful on this.
Eye-shaped.
Right.
Where we at?
Now, can I just say, on lot coverage, we had discussed having retention pond, water retention ponds eliminated from the lot coverage percentage calculation. Where is that occurring? Because when I look at this definition, it would appear that they would be included.
And so I think that comes into the open space definitions, not the lot coverage, because your lot coverage is the amount of impervious surface. And if you're more concerned about them not being counted towards open space,
Tom had brought that up as part of the stormwater section, but,
yeah.
and I sort of like that idea, but that's your guys' decision about, like, if you use a BMP, that can be calculated as open space, but a retention pond can't, you know what I mean?
Yeah, I think it's more about what falls into the definition of open space rather than your percentage of lot coverage, which is the lot that's being covered by impervious surface. A stormwater management pond is not impervious surface, because water literally goes through it.
Right.
So that's not going to be part of lot coverage, because the water it's designed to hold the water and the water go through. So I think that's more of an open space is where we were discussing it. And I think it's not in the overall open space. I think it was one of the, was it usable open space?
I don't see it in here. I don't see it in the code, and I don't see it in definitions, and I'm just wondering where that, because I think we all.
Yeah, I agree. I have a note here that, in my own notes, that we would be combining, that some of this could be combined in the open space, but I think we do need to explicitly say what is not open space.
Well, I'm getting confused by lot coverage and open space. So
I think lot coverage is good, Tom.
Okay, and then we move on to the discussion of open space?
Yes, I think lot coverage is,
I think Janelle's right. I think that open space should be, Nancy.
Yes,
okay,
but
go.
I believe it would be in the code, not in these definitions, but I don't see it in either, so.
And then that's for whether or not BMPs can count towards open space?
Whether a water retention pond counts as open space.
Right, I
Our
think, and I'll
concern-
have to go back and look at it, I think that was originally in there and possibly taken out after discussions at the subcommittee meeting, but I have to go back and revisit that.
we ended
Because
up-
it was originally in there.
Because we had the discussion about density and the concerning that you can't use it towards
Density.
the density, so I'm not sure.
And where does that appear?
That needs to actually appear in the zoning code as part of the wetlands section. And then there's another section we can actually put it
But
into.
we're not changing the zoning code.
Well, there'll be
Right.
some minor tweaks to the zoning code,
Okay.
because we don't want, like, if we're changing something here and then there's also something in the zoning code, we need to make sure we didn't forget them, so the cross-reference is correct. The intent is not, we're not rewriting the zoning code, it's just to make sure that the references match.
Okay.
But if there's something that we need to fix there to make sure it's here, we can.
I'm just wondering if there's anything that should be here that relates to that would be in the definition.
I think it should be here too. We do have at least that open space community is a natural open space. After natural open space has been designated, the area may be used for passive or active recreation, stormwater management
Well,
is not,
if you look at open space permanent, the one right underneath
Right.
it, it says a parcel or parcels of land or an area of water, which is pretty broad.
natural water.
It just says water.
Yeah, see, that's where, I think we're back to doing what we were trying to avoid doing.
I mean, I kind of like Tom's idea of like, to encourage BMP use, to allow that to be calculated in open space, but like non-BMP stormwater management features would not be, but I don't know how that would stir up the waters, or how much that would stir up the...
Good pun intended.
The current code,
My question
not in
on
the
page 7
definitions,
was,
but in the
had to
current
do with,
open space code, I'm looking at page 53 under standards, and this is in the open space. What can count as open space? So under standards there, which is 17019 or 26E, and I think it's page 53.
yes,
Under 4C, it talks about structures and uses that can be permitted to be counted as required open space. Originally, this had that anything that was a BMP could count, anything that wasn't couldn't. And then it was changed because I think there was hesitancy about concerns about not allowing this. So it only allows under 2 if you have more than 30% open space that BMPs can be counted towards it. So it's gotten more, I mean, here's where it's dealt with. It's not dealt with it in the definition section.
okay. And 4C1C says stormwater management basins, spillways, level spreaders, bioretention areas, and water retention ponds cannot count towards open space.
Right, if it's 30%
there.
or less.
Okay.
And it's gone back and forth.
Wait, sorry, where do you see the 30% or less? That, oh, I see, because if it provides more
C
than
applies to
30%.
anything that is required open space, and required open space has to be 30% of the tract. Yeah. So if we're saying any development in Lewis that comes in, it has to have 30% required open space. So under C, it's not restating, it's just saying that structures or uses can't count towards that or under that list.
And it only counts towards it if they're providing more than 30% and if the stormwater best management practices are graded into the natural terrain permitting recreational use during the majority of weather conditions. So
That's correct.
Yeah, that's fine to me. It's just having a big deep hole that is only a danger to children. It's just, in my mind, isn't providing valuable open space.
Sure, children.
Yes.
Originally, it was allowed in there because the idea was to incentivize BMPs. That's what Charlie was talking about. And when we go look at the new section 170-30 under stormwater, there's still a little box in there that talks about should we incentivize stormwater BMPs, and it all comes down to this: can they count as open space or can they or not? So I think what we're saying is that if it's developments that are only providing the minimum open space, which is 30%, it cannot count. If a development is providing more, and that would be for a cluster or something, then they can count.
Yeah. Now, so I feel comfortable with this. You've answered my questions. My other question on page 8, and I'm going to page 8 just because it's also on open space. Is open space usable? We say that it's available and accessible for use and enjoyment by all residents of the development or a designated portion of a development. If a development is providing space that is accessible for use both by residents and the general public, I'm assuming that would still be appropriate open space usable, or usable open space.
Yeah,
I mean, should
I would
we?
say so.
I was just wondering when we don't include the general public in there, if we're saying, if we're discouraging people from letting the public use it.
I think it's challenging to say for a development that has its own common open space, whether or not that's open to the public or not.
But I think Nancy's saying that we're not going to require it, but if a developer says, I'm going to make it open to the residents and also to the general public as well, and the HOA still has to manage it, we don't want to exclude that from being called open space, so.
Right.
Yeah.
Yeah, I would get rid of or designated portion of a development and then just put in general public.
Well, isn't, I thought that the designated portion of a development, I don't know whether we have spaces big enough that this would ever come into play. It's if it's a really big development, you might have, a playground for, phase A and a playground for phase B, and,
Yeah, but typically they're all part of the same HOA, so it'd all still be open.
Okay.
So I can live in phase 2 and I can use the amenities in phase 6. Because it's still the same HOA, because I don't think we want to start getting into, I live on this street, but I can't use the park across the street because it's in a different phase. That can get...
Yeah, it can get kind of technical. Village of 5 Points, for example, has different shareholders, and if you live in different areas of the neighborhood, so there are certain amenities that you're responsible for as a shareholder that other ones aren't responsible for, so it can get technical that way. But I think for a definition like this, the point really is just that we don't want to exclude from what's called open space an area that the developer kind of generously says, I'm going to make it available to everybody.
Yeah.
I'm not sure if
So
that's right.
I'm wondering about the wording on that so that it's not confusing that down the road, it's perceived that if it counts as usable, that it has to be open to the public.
Right. Yeah, I agree. You got to word it
You put an
carefully.
"or" in there, isn't that going to be sufficient? By all residents of the development or residents and the general public?
If designated.
Yeah,
I think if you
yeah,
put that, or if designated for the general public.
yeah.
Something like that, so it's clearly,
yeah.
doesn't,
Okay.
Anything else on page 8? Page 9. Page 10. Now I'm going to open, now it's my turn to open a can of worms, okay, Deborah? Under the definition of structure, does art or sculpture count as a structure? It says for or ornamentation. Okay.
So I think we just leave this right now. I think we leave it right now as it is because the city has reached out to get some advice on a very similar topic.
For other things, so I think we leave this one alone because it currently matches the one in the zoning, and if the city so chooses to amend that, then we come back and, because I believe we've reached out to try to sort this one out. Does that help in a very vague, odd way, but...
Yeah, I think I'm asking probably a separate question because, you know, although certainly many things can be, you know, art, like many things, is in the eye of the beholder, I guess, but...
And typically, we do have a public art committee, and they provide, like if it's going in the city park, they're reviewing it and making a recommendation to sometimes mayor and council for final approval for art installations.
I'm
not
thinking
sure.
of a subdivision, though, that decides we're going to put...
A giant obelisk.
Yeah. Or a sculpture that someone might consider in poor taste, you know?
One, I think they'd have to get that approved from their HOA board, because it would fall into the HOA.
Yeah.
And
But
if it
we're
meets-
saying the HOA approves it, and the city
It's
residents...
part of the original design
Yeah.
plan, say.
I'm going to admit, in my 20-plus years of doing this, I've never seen that.
Okay.
I can even only one. In the Wolf Creek, not here, the Wolf Creek commercial development up in Dover, there's like a large fountain, and in the center of it, there's it's like a globe that's on this water, and it kind of like can spin and stuff, and so it was kind of an art slash, you know, so it was approved with the development. I don't remember if there was much discussion about it, but I could see where, you know, perhaps as an entranceway, you know, the entranceway sign has this big, massive sculpture that could be offensive or not to certain people. And so your question is, does that become structure that is somehow reviewed under the subdivision code
Right.
in the approval process? I don't know.
I don't know, because I'm thinking your sign category, we're going to catch as part of a sign.
Sign ordinance.
And typically the ones I see are like
Per
some type of
se,
fountain in the ponds, one to help aerate and two to help
Yeah.
kind of provide an amenity.
Monuments, what else could we add to this that would make it?
Right now, I don't think we want to touch this definition. I think we wait and see, and this is just my suggestion, because I know the city's looking at holistically something, and I think right now if we just
Okay.
amend what the zoning code has, because then if the zoning or definition gets changed, then we'll come back and amend this one, so there's consistency across the board. Does that sound fair?
No, I'm just wondering, you know, if it's something that is, I'm worried about pervious, you know, impervious surfaces, more so if you're going to have some sort of grand entrance, and if that contributes. Sometimes they almost could be a structure.
So again, an entrance, like a sign that's on a wall, they're getting a permit for that. That typically does not impact overall your lot coverage, because one, it's typically on the open space, so it's not on the individual lot coverage. So it's typically looking at that, but I think that's definitely something we can look at. And as we look at the rest of the broader areas, as we look at that definition.
And impervious is currently under review elsewhere, right?
Correct.
Because I think there's a big debate
Yep,
right now.
so right now it's
The
in,
science of what counts as pervious and impervious.
yep, so
Okay, anything on page 11? Our last four
The only thing I was
definitions.
gonna say is,
I think I might add a definition for traffic impact study, if you guys think that's.
NTOA.
And TOA,
Yeah,
yes.
yeah, okay, good.
Yeah, that would be great.
Gotcha. Okay. I probably will keep it broad so it doesn't stay too much and not stay too little, you know?
Okay. Okay, now we will move on to 170-23, and that's on page 31. I thought I had to write down the pages for each of these.
I'm sorry, Nancy, what was, I missed that. Where are we going?
Page 31, 170-23.
Yeah, so I made most of these revisions, and it just follows the way that we run our projects now during construction. And we have basically 3 levels. We have a conditional acceptance, a final action acceptance.
Are you finding it?
So
Oh, it's on page 41?
different version.
Different
The
version.
one that got handed out today, it's on page 41.
sorry.
That's why you're looking at me.
Online acceptance and occupancy.
Yes, that's it.
Okay.
Acceptance and occupancy, bottom of page 41.
Okay. So anyway, the way I've written this is the way that we've been doing it. Most recently, where we have, at the end of the project, when all the infrastructure's been installed, the developer can request a conditional acceptance of those facilities. And as the city engineer, we determine whether that's a reasonable request or not, based on the amount of work that's left or the level of punch list items that still remain. And then we go through all these steps of, having a punch list inspection, a final inspection, developing a punch list, making sure that those things get completed, and then recommending conditional acceptance to the City and Board of Public Works.
I was kind of surprised, Charlie, that the existing code didn't seem to include any of this.
Yeah.
That it describes the paperwork that needs to be submitted, but not the process that's permitted to,
Which I think,
set a punch list, et cetera.
yeah, and I think if you guys are comfortable with it, I felt like it's a better description of what the developer can expect during that
Yes.
part of the project.
I want to just make sure I'm not missing this.
Okay.
Within, the developer has a punch list, and the city has to go back many times because they're not completing the items. Is it stated implicitly anywhere whose cost that will be? That the developer will incur all costs of?
Well, they have a 150% bond in place, such that if they don't address it, there's recourse for the city to
Call the bond.
call the bond and get the money to do it.
Including the professional expertise, though, I mean.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, that's why it's 150% and not 100%.
So your question, though, is the developer pays for the time of the city employees or subcontractors who come out to do this?
Yeah, they'll pay for my time, which is usually the biggest piece of it, yeah. And then the city and the board typically have an administrative percentage of my fee in escrow that can also be drawn from that escrow account.
Okay. So just no need to overstate it here then, that's all I'm checking.
I don't think so.
No.
I think we've got the fees covered.
Yeah.
I'm hoping.
Because I think that's something that the public
Yeah.
doesn't really understand, because, the great cry is to make the developers pay for,
Yeah.
and honestly, a lot of these things they are paying for.
We
And I
get it
think
coming
that-
and going. We get it from, the public doesn't understand that they're not paying, and then the developer tells me that I'm charging them too much.
I'm sure you get it both ways.
And I think the revised fee section, in my mind, made this, even more clear, so, than the old version, so.
Better read BPW's inspection fees and impact fees paid someday. You want to get your,
And out of curiosity, which I know Janelle can address and Charlie, I'm sure, are the fees that we charge, are these comparable to what would be charged if the developments were in the county?
For our application fee, it's more.
It's more, and our involvement.
And our bond and our administrative fees and all of that?
I think the bond is still 150% both in the county and the city. The
Administration fees, those were typically through the engineering department. And then I know when I used to do, because they'd have to bond the amenities, I'd get a call, if they tried to tell me that a tree was gonna be $69, I was like, yeah, go back and get me a real cost of a tree, which should be several $100s.
Yeah.
So
Because it's, they're paying it based on a percentage. If the fees are a percentage,
yeah, the administration fees all went through the engineering department and the bonds, and except for, I think, there was, things kept moving about who had what bond, but yeah, it was all included and developer paid.
Refresh my memory, does the county keep a site inspector on site the entire time, or do they kind of rotate around to different projects? Do you remember?
I don't remember, because that really would have been Public Works, because the zoning inspectors only went out and the building inspectors only went out for when they were called for like the footers and the framing and the zoning and those types of inspections. So I don't know if there was somebody from Public Works constantly on site for
Pretty sure they're not.
utilities.
I'm pretty sure they're not. Like, they check in 2-3 times a day, but they're not out there. Whereas in the city, there's somebody from representing the city and the board out there the entire time.
Yeah. I think it's just probably,
So to answer Deborah's question, that's probably more expensive for them.
yes.
But provides better oversight.
Yes.
well, that's as I think it should be.
for Charlie, about, we recently passed that fire protection ordinance.
Yeah.
Should anything be in here about inspecting, or who does inspect the fire protection, the sprinkler systems that are now?
The Board of Public Works, via GMB, will review the new service to the property.
Okay.
The actual fire suppression system review has to be done by a professional, registered state of Delaware fire protection engineer, which I am not.
True.
So we're currently working with the Office of the State Fire Marshal
Yeah.
for some of those initial plan reviews, and staff is being trained to do the plan reviews, and we're going to be working on determining the best way to do the inspections. But that'll all be on some of it will be on the building side, and then BPW and
You don't have to generically just mention that under this category of inspections?
Well,
would it fall under one of the water line inspections? I'm just asking.
we've got it in there as part of what's required for the BPW's review of the fire service to the home or to the townhouse. This other thing that we're talking about does have two pieces. It has to be designed by a fire protection engineer, and then it has to be reviewed by either the state fire marshal or the city.
It's just that we have, I'm talking about occupancy, that's going to be a keystone of the occupancy permit.
Right.
You add this system.
We're adding it to our checklist as you're not getting,
A CO without that.
I don't know
being
that
done.
it should, well, maybe it should show up in this acceptance and occupancy piece, but it's more, you're reviewing it at the beginning of the project than at the end of the project.
You're reviewing the concept and the installation details and stuff, whether it works, it's another item
Yeah,
down the road.
yeah. Well, let us think about that. I don't know where it would fit.
Okay.
Yeah.
When we were talking about
Glenn?
landscaping a few meetings back, we talked about is that covered in the improvements and maintenance? So I'm wondering, should that be in the list here or the one below it? Warranty inspection?
Well, the warranty inspection, now, I think if you're gonna hit it, you wanna hit it earlier than that, Tom. The warranty inspection is really a much less detailed inspection, because everything's already been reviewed twice and approved twice, conditionally and finally. It's just based on a one-year inspection of, oftentimes I'll ask the city and the board staff, hey, you have any problems with water or any leaking, and then we'll develop a punch list that needs to be addressed 1 year later. But I think if we want to do this fire, it would be before that.
Would it be in like the implementation of the approved plans? Because that's where you're talking about the notice to proceed, the work performance.
I guess I just don't know who would do it.
Right.
Yeah.
I mean, I'm not qualified to do it, so it would have to be,
Yeah, it would be a third party
Yeah,
at
with
this
other
point, because we're still working on getting,
I guess it's sort of.
Or would it be, I
plumbing
mean,
inspection.
in your point, Joe, that of the need to ensure this is done before occupancy, would it be under one of completion of all utility systems?
Considered utilities, yeah.
Yeah.
That could be. It's just a matter of, we're not going to sort out who's doing it. It's just a
Yeah.
matter of getting a mention in there, so
That it needs to be
everybody knows
complete,
about
yeah.
it, yes.
Yeah.
Yeah, I don't know, though, because correct me if I'm wrong again, but like the plumbing inspection, the electrical inspection, that's all
They're all
done.
third party.
That's all by the, but that's not part of the subdivision process, that's part of the building.
It's part of the building inspection process.
I mean,
So I think,
that's what we would do with this as
I
well.
see what you're saying, it'd be under the building.
yeah, it's not
Okay, that
actually
makes
part of the
sense.
subdivision
Yeah.
process. It's part of the building permit process
Yeah.
that we need to make sure it's installed.
Okay,
Under a checklist.
And it's been, yes.
okay.
All right.
Okay, that makes,
That's good.
are you, I'm
One
happy
thing
with
I
that.
have
yeah.
noted in the water section is that the size of the service to the house or the townhouse or whatever structure we're talking about has to be determined by the fire protection engineer, and GMB will review that. So we'll have some sense of, at least the part that the BPW is going to be responsible for, what size it should be based on the fire
Size
protection.
may increase based on this new use being added.
Well, it's a little bit of a bone of contention, but generally, 1 inch like we do right now for just without the fire service, 1 inch is fine for fire service, because you really don't need that many gallons per minute to run a sprinkler system in a house.
Nobody's going to be taking a shower and the house is burning, so
Yeah.
they'll flee.
Hey, Tom,
Any,
I do have a couple minor revisions that I noticed didn't show up in yours, that I had given you probably before, but probably got lost in all the iterations we had. Some of them, well, they're kind of important, but can I share those with you between now and the
Yeah,
next
just
one?
highlight what I might have missed.
Okay.
And,
Yeah.
yeah.
So, and I actually have an idea. I'm just looking at 17021. It's called Standard Conditions of Approved Major Subdivisions. Can we just call it Standards of Approved Major Subdivisions? Because I don't want to get the concern that
conditions.
conditions are something that the planning commission and mayor and council could place on them. And these are just kind of standards that
yeah.
you have to do. Does that make sense?
So just call it standards of approved
Charlie,
major
your thought, because I'm
subdivision
thinking this
application.
falls under.
Procedure, are they procedural more than conditions?
What did you want to call them?
Just standards, standards of approved major subdivision applications?
Yeah, that's fine.
Okay, thank you.
Is everyone comfortable, since we're looking at that right now, that the insurance, the level of insurance is appropriate given inflation, et cetera? I'm looking at 170-21, which would be on your page
Page 38.
38, yeah.
Those limits are what we use right now on city and BPW capital projects. It's something that we can keep an eye on, I think, Nancy, because I have seen some requirements of like $10 million umbrella liability, but I don't know that we're quite there yet.
Yeah.
Yeah, they do seem kind of,
They seem kind of low to me
seem low.
for liability. for umbrella liability, just because you have multiple workers on the site, you have, depending upon the size of the site, so, it's just if we're correcting things now, this is the time if we, I don't want to be excessive in the requirements, but I do want to be realistic in terms of.
Absolutely.
I have to say is that I run a tiny, a very small little dog rescue that doesn't have a building, and we have $1 million bodily injury
Wow, okay.
Yeah. I mean,
as a nonprofit.
I've seen where the general aggregate
this
is
is
like
what we are required to do,
3 million, and then the umbrella is 10.
just a little.
Sometimes the umbrella captures everything that's not covered in anything above that. Would you allow me to think that over a little bit?
Yes,
Okay.
yeah.
All right.
And, maybe we can look at what other jurisdictions are doing too, if
Yeah,
they're
probably, yeah.
still in, if we're really.
And maybe
compared
district
to others.
overlay does, is that, what else is relevant?
Yeah,
Instead of reinventing the wheel here, I think most relevant is relevant.
Okay. I'll see if I can hunt that down. So we have a conditional acceptance that follows through on all these processes. And then we have final action, which the developer can request within 90 days of the conditional. At that point, the requirements are a little bit more detailed, where we have all these as-built plan requirements. So one thing I wanted to talk about, if you go to 12724B, as-built plans, and then little b, it says at the very end, the as-built plan shall include the following, and then there's this extensive list of requirements. I really would recommend that Janelle and Tom, that we pull that list out and make it a reference, because I just have a feeling things are going to change as time goes by, and technology in terms of drafting.
So we've got a policy that they'll have to reference, okay?
Yeah, so that we can update that policy without updating this code every single time something like that happens.
That's what we
too
did
bad
with the
Glenn
plan
isn't here,
concepts,
because I thought that
preliminary and
Glenn,
final.
the last time we talked about this, said even if you pull it out, you're still updating it, and it has to go through the same process as if it were in the code.
Oh, okay.
Ask Glenn.
So let's ask Glenn.
Yeah, I mean,
You
yeah,
know,
that's probably more.
I understand the point, though.
Yeah, good, okay.
Anything else on this? We're getting a little short
Yeah,
on
sorry.
time here, and I'd like to make sure we get to stormwater, since that's been something of great concern. And that is 170-30. And let's see what page it is here.
I gave it to you this morning, or this afternoon.
Okay. Buried in here somewhere.
What page do you have it on, Janelle?
I just printed out Charlie's handout.
67 is what I see on, I think what I see. My handout?
Uh-huh.
I gave you one?
You emailed it.
Oh, yeah, I have it here. It's a separate document.
Oh, that one.
You
yeah.
have it on page 80 of the document.
Yes. 170-30, runoff and drainage.
Yeah, my document only goes to page 72. And you put in the entire thing, so.
Does Deborah have this?
No, do you have an extra copy of this for Deborah? We can share.
Oh, no, he just took mine. I have it on.
I thought I printed out like
Thank you.
a bunch, but probably not, apparently not enough.
A lot of people to do.
Yeah.
Cut down those trees, yeah.
I try not to, but.
Well, we're looking at the one that, Charlie, that you provided to me yesterday, or the day before, and I incorporated in, because there were changes from the original.
Yeah, we're looking at the one that Charlie sent just the last couple of days.
Yeah.
Okay, that's good.
And it seems that on the first page, one point of discussion is whether there should be provisions that apply stormwater management review for areas less than 5,000 square feet.
Yeah, so
And I
I felt like the individual lot grading plan,
Lot grading certificate would cover lots under 5,000 or lots over 5,000.
in terms of, but most especially the under 5,000, because that doesn't require SED review.
And we'll really get into those for site development plans more than subdivisions.
Yeah.
That's really where that comes into play a lot more.
Is there anything in, I mean, that was my question, is when we're looking at this, if something is under 5,000 square feet, what parts of the subdivision code would come into play?
Well, you gotta, I would suggest taking a step back, because you're looking at the subdivision as a whole. So they're gonna get conservation district approval for the entire thing.
Right.
But these standards also apply to site plans. So where the under 5,000 can come into play is your standard, a site plan. That's typically where that falls under, because your lot grading plan for a subdivision, your lots are going to be 5,000 square feet, or we've got existing lots, but they've already gotten approval for the conservation district, and the conservation district and a lot grading plan are going, okay, we've got approved plans. Does your design match the approved plans? And then verify at the end that they match the approved plans. So I think really the under 5,000 really applies to, because these criteria, all of these apply to the site plans to a degree.
Here's my confusion, and this may be, lack of knowledge. You have a subdivision, and you have the plan, the grading, the lot grading plan, everything for the whole subdivision. That subdivision may be divided up for houses into lots. But that plan can't take into account where houses are being placed, what's getting dug up or modified as people build houses.
Well,
So that-
if you have the site plan, you typically have the footprint where the setbacks are too.
Yes.
And that defines where the house can go in there. They could go up to that dotted line, or there could be ins and outs and all that stuff. But you have the general knowledge.
But you may be putting in a level patio that changes the grading of that lot. You may be putting in a swimming pool that changes the grading of that lot. The setbacks do all of that, but, all of these have to be within the setbacks. But it seems to me the grading can get changed fairly substantially.
Not with the lot grading plan.
Yeah, so that was exactly the catalyst for why we're requiring the lot grading plan and lot grading certificate, is that in the past, we do have like a overall grading plan for the subdivision, but we didn't have that level of detail for individual lots, but now we are requiring that.
Okay, so
now it's like, we all have lots in the same subdivision.
But Nancy, you can build your house here. Deborah, you can't build your house here. It has to be here.
okay.
And Charlie's has to be here. And Tom's has to be here.
And so when I'm building my lot and I come to the, someone in the building department here and I say, listen, the plan said that there's a swale going across my backyard, and it goes like this. But I really want to dig a ditch and have it turn right corners and it'll be a thumbs down. Okay.
Or I want to, I guess this is lot coverage, put a huge paved entertaining area out back. That becomes lot coverage, so it's a no.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's more of a lot.
And like, but the other thing is swimming pools. Because we can't have below grade really in the city of Lewis swimming pools. So, am I having a raised paved area for a giant swimming pool?
Again, that comes to your lot grading plan. You have a lot grading plan that says your lot grades this way. You can't significantly change the way your lot grades.
So even if I say, what I'm doing will handle twice the water that swale will handle, the building department will not approve it.
Because it's gonna go through Charlie actually, right? That the lot grading plan is it gets submitted as part of the building permit. It gets reviewed, going, yes, it matches. Then even at the end, there's an engineer, not Charlie, a separate engineer going, as it's been built, it meets that grading plan. So we are
What's the
trying to reduce the
question
issues.
about any thought in adding provision to apply stormwater management review for areas less than 5,000 square feet? Because isn't the grading plan actually addressing that?
Maybe Tom was thinking about the site plans, Tom?
Site plans for less than 5,000 square feet?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, because right now, the conservation district only, you get a general
I see
permit
what
from the
you're saying,
conservation
yeah.
district,
I understand.
but after 5,000 square feet, or 5,000 square feet more, you have to do a detailed stormwater management plan. Below that, you're just doing a general standard plan.
Okay.
So I can tell you that even though we don't require the individual lot grading plan at this time, but, like on Fancy Pants, we reviewed it in terms of its grading plan and its effect on neighboring properties and how runoff was going to occur. So we're doing that now for site plans.
Fancy Pants brings a smile to everyone's
does.
face when it comes up.
It's just the best name.
The one I'm shortening, I just call it Fancy now.
You need the fancy pants. Fancy pants.
Okay, as we're looking at this, any comments on grading? I know we're going a bit over time, and I appreciate people's
Maybe we can
patience.
look at it again.
Yes.
Just trying to think if there's anything I really wanted to highlight. Tom did the yeoman's work on the front end of this. I just made some comments. Oh, I do want to ask, applicability number 3, Tom? For each development, a site development agreement shall be executed before any building permits may be issued. I wasn't sure what that meant, that site, for that to show up under stormwater. Because I know there's a development agreement but that's bigger, that's got a lot of things in it.
Right, I think that this was done before, quite a while ago, before we talked about development agreements that we already have in there. And also before we talked about, that I was aware of the lot grading plan and other things. So there's things in here that, and in fact, when I incorporated this into the code, I took number 3 out.
Oh, shoot, I'm looking at the one I sent you, not what you sent out. I'm sorry.
Right, yeah, so
okay.
I looked at your comments and I took that out because I thought it would be covered under the bigger
And for,
development agreement that's done.
okay, sorry about that. I didn't notice that. And then, I don't know, maybe address this one too, under standards or grading, number 2, sediment and stormwater. Oh, you added that in there about for preliminary approval. Okay, good. I'm sorry. Questions?
I looked at your comments when you sent it to me
Yeah.
and just realized that what you're asking for was that I didn't really understand the lot grading and individual lot grading plans earlier.
Yeah.
So I factored that into what I had drafted originally. And then also for the things about the agreement, and there was one other one about, when we were asking for a certified engineer to do everything, that should be covered under what's on a final plan and a preliminary plan. It needs to have a certified engineer certificate for that.
Okay,
So some things, based on your comments, I took out.
okay, thanks.
The blue boxes on here, are those your comments, Tom, or Charlie's?
Tom's questions and at least my responses in orange.
So you're the orange.
Yeah.
So the,
Which one?
these were incentives you were considering adding in, is that right? But they're not, because I didn't see them currently in here, all of these.
I think
Yeah,
Tom,
that's what I was floating to in the original draft that went out.
Okay,
That we had talked about incentivizing some things, so I didn't put them in code, I just put them in thoughts. in the box and sent it around. I think some of them, Nancy, to look at now, we do have things in there, like we've incorporated in the best management practices.
Right.
And we added in the reference to the document that the city did as part of Resilient Communities. So some of it's in there, but it's more for guidelines, because as Janelle would say, stormwater is administered and enforced by the state through the Conservation District. What we're trying to do with the best management practices is encourage things through guidelines. I actually think it's in standards, but they're promoted as you should look at these best management practices, because normally if they're done at a certain scale, you're cutting down the amount of stormwater then you have to engineer into runoff systems. So we're trying to present it as stop the runoff from your site design before you have to control it with systems that have to be reviewed by the Conservation District.
Well, I mean, I think we're already under the open space, giving an incentive there for
Right.
BMP use, right?
Yeah, for anything over 30%, and I would agree, if it's under 30%, you don't have, it's got to be usable.
Yeah.
The blue boxes were done when I originally did this back in, I don't know, June or whatever, and I think a lot of them we've addressed one way or another.
I mean, I'm going through each of these just to make sure we have a discussion on them. On the allowances for some BMPs to be counted in Zone A and B of wetland buffers, I feel uncomfortable with that, and I kind of agree with the comments in yellow there.
Yeah, I do too,
Yeah.
completely.
So I don't mean to be rude, but I actually have to be off-site to another meeting in like 15 minutes.
Very rude, very rude.
I know.
Can we look at our dates for future meetings? And I think
So-
we have a good outline of what we need to cover at the next meeting.
So the next meeting is actually next Tuesday, the 16th.
Yeah, 1
And
o'clock.
then the week after that is actually the public workshop.
Right.
So I'm going to try to have some draft ideas for the public workshop and some handouts and stuff for that.
And our original plan was to have that meeting focused exclusively on planning for the public workshop
Yeah.
Is that
Now-
before or after Thanksgiving?
before.
It's the 23rd is the public workshop. It's the Tuesday before.
I see it, okay, now I got it. Okay.
So I'm a little worried that,
Well,
Well, and the good thing is, we're only talking about draft concepts. So I think from my feeling is we've got a really good grasp on this. So I think we're still, comfortable with going to the public, knowing that we always knew there were going to be changes, because the public's definitely going to provide feedback.
Yeah, we're really delving into the micro level
Yeah.
here, and, yeah, they're probably gonna have, so my question is, our meeting on the 16th, what is the time on that meeting?
1 o'clock.
Well, not just the time, but the
3 hours.
duration.
3 hours.
It's a 3-hour, right, okay, I think we're okay.
And I would like to only spend the first hour on finalizing the stuff we haven't covered.
yeah. I think Janelle makes a good point, is that, like even this, that we haven't, the stormwater piece that we haven't, obviously we went through it very quickly today. Okay, even if we were, if the workshop were next week, I think we're in a position where we could present it, and we know that we're gonna get back together, and at that time, we'd get feedback from the public as well on it all.
The one thing that I need assistance on is having a good bullet point summary of the changes that have been made to Article 4. So, like, we've looked at runoff and drainage today. There are a lot of changes here, but we need to be able to net it down to, a small number of bullet points that highlight what we're doing and why. The
I
same.
could take an initial shot at that and share it with Charlie and Janelle in between our next meeting.
Thank you.
Yeah, if you could share that with me at the same time, because I've been working on that presentation. I have like a blank space for, some slides on this, and I will try to then put it into that format, which you then can use, place into the city's format, so.
Yeah, I'm really sorry that I can't step up for that. We're closing up Lewis Lights, and it's crunch time there as well.
We appreciate the work you've been doing, so.
So, just wanted to throw it out there, and we might have talked about it last time, is that when we have our workshop, and we're gonna have the different stations, that at each station, anything that we can do to like graphically represent the changes would be
I
a
have
big.
seen boards,
Okay.
and I might have to get some of those ordered, because I have not ordered those yet, but the other supplies have been ordered.
Good.
The order's done.
Yeah, everything takes 6 times as long.
So at our next meeting for the first hour, and I will be more draconian in that first hour, we will do a quick revisitation of the 22 considerations. And I think that's critical for us before the public meeting.
Yeah, because that I want, so
Yeah.
I want to do a big board of that one.
And then the changes that are being made to 170-30, 170-23 and 24, and 170-6. People will have those. I'd ask you to submit any written comments to Janelle on them. And that's something that we can get incorporated before the public meeting, but we're not going to have a detailed discussion on those. We'll have a chance to revisit it after the public meeting.
And they will be emailed out to us?
Yes,
Okay.
yes.
And then last will be our planning. the
Planning
meeting.
for the meeting, okay. And there are kind of 3 parts to the planning for the meeting in my mind. Janelle, you're doing most of this planning though, so you may have more parts to it. To me, one part is, what's the content of the presentation to the public? Because I think that kind of sets the stage and gives them the overview. The second part is, how are we handling all of these stations and getting feedback? And how do we provide, and the third is like, what materials are we providing that people can take away with them? Or, those who want to dig in deep, et cetera. What are we giving?
And can I also add, just to think about, not just content, but kind of messaging?
Yeah.
And how we're crafting this to make the public understand that we are really trying to make this an improvement for the residents of the city of Lewis, and also make a mission statement, perhaps, up front.
Good purpose.
Yeah.
A good purpose, right. And also making this less onerous on the developers with more feedback earlier on.
Yeah. And clearer for developers in terms of, like the things we're doing to make it kind of user-friendly in terms of the kind of checklists and whatnot that hopefully will assist them.
Yeah,
Are we good?
because it is a positive thing. We need to keep it as a positive thing.
Janelle's going to pull our plug any minute now.
Yep.
Okay, I propose that we
Adjourn.
adjourn this meeting.
So moved.
All in favor? We are. Thank you, everyone.
Bye.
Good night.
Thank you, Tom.
And thank you, Joe.
Executive session?
That's not funny. I literally have to be on site for another meeting.
Where you going?
Uh-huh.